The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. The Echo Chamber is brought to you by Weber Shandwick. Our team of analysts, creatives, technologists and strategists bring clarity to the complex in a prove it works world with global scale and local insight. Weber Shandwick, we solve.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. We are broadcasting live from Cannes. We're actually not broadcasting live. We're recording this in Cannes. This is Arun Sudhaman from the Holmes Report, and I'm really happy to be joined today by two people from Weber Shandwick. We have Chris Perry, who's Chief Digital Officer, and Hugh Baillie, who's the President of X Practice for EMEA and Asia Pacific. Welcome, guys.
Hey, good to be here, Arun.
Thank you.
How are you enjoying, I'd say, the week so far? It's only Tuesday, so I feel like it's maybe not long enough to get a handle on what's going on.
So far, so good. I got in about midday yesterday, right into meetings and panels and the beach, and I think it's going to play into the theme, or one of the themes we'll talk about today, which it's data everywhere.
Right, okay. Hugh?
Similar arrival time, some really fascinating panels. Maybe actually too many panels because you get a bit split for where to go. So maybe slightly overwhelmed by content, so maybe smaller audiences than some of the ones that I'm going to. But really high level content, and data is pretty prominent in that.
Okay, so you mentioned data everywhere. Perhaps maybe give our listeners an idea, particularly those who aren't here, how are you seeing that tangibly?
Yeah, so I'll maybe talk about it through a couple different perspectives, just given where we came from last week. So we just essentially relaunched the positioning, for the agency around this notion of we solve, which really I think speaks to the conversation here at Cannes and beyond with clients. There's some known needs around campaigns and things that really move the needle that increasingly are being informed by data and analytics. There's also a lot of unknowns in terms of risk and reputation implications around machine learning and AI and all that. And we just feel that there's a moment in time where we and other agencies in the PR space have to step up, and data is going to be a really key piece to us being able to deliver on that. So whether it's what we're doing inside of Weber Shandwick or what we're seeing on the beach and in the panels, the diversity of what we can do is growing, and we're pretty excited about that.
And just staying with you quickly, I mean, in terms of what you see in Cannes, in what ways are you seeing data at the forefront of, the way that maybe agencies are coming to market here, or even brands? Yeah,
so I just came from an IAB series of sessions all on direct brands. What's really interesting is it's a combination of agency people like ourselves, bottom up direct-to-consumer brands, and then the technology and analytics players that are enabling a different model. That really, I think, speaks to the broader issue that I think all incumbent companies are facing. There's competition coming from lots of different places, and the stack, if you will, on how they go to market is very different from, let's say, again, the most iconic brands in the world that have been built through more of an advertising and broadcast model. The foundation of these direct-to-consumer models is data, and understanding exactly what the person is doing when they go to Instagram, when they go then to your e-commerce page, when they maybe bounce around or take a couple steps and take it through. So the idea of digital display without some kind of transaction with data, supporting that, I think companies are going to be challenged, whether they're new cos or incumbent cos. And that was just stark just because I just came from a couple sessions there where it was just clear as day.
Yeah. I mean, Hugh, do you see it as a fundamental shift in the marketing model?
No, absolutely, yeah. For several reasons. One, it's a lot easier to gather and measure and capture, and so the tools and platforms are there to give you a lot more data. The pressure is always on to justify the work that you're doing, but also just the potential. People are now discovering the potential more. So I spent a couple of hours this morning going through the short lists from the data creativity section, and the work has really moved on there. It's much a broader set of work, much less tactical, much more substantial work. So you can just see it coming through in the work, which is always telling that it's here and really exciting. And I think even having said that, looking at it, we're just scratching the surface with the potential. There's a lot more that we can do. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
So there's a lot of, we're obviously seeing a lot of talk about data and a lot of action as well, to be fair. But I guess one of the challenges is making that connection between all of the data, all of the information, towards real creative effectiveness. And do you see that kind of loop actually being closed?
Yeah, as I say, I've seen it in the work this morning, and we might come on to talk about some of the stuff we're doing as well. But there was just this brilliant Dutch bicycle company that they make bikes, and they took the city of Paris for a week, and they transformed everyone's license plate on the car into a promotional code, and the more polluting your car was, the bigger the discount they gave on their bike. And in 1 week they sold just under 300 bicycles on a small test in Paris. It's called Car to Bike. And you imagine sort of governments or cities getting behind that to ease pollution. You see that's proper effectiveness on the biggest problem we have facing us, which is climate change. But it's done not just a kind of tactical in the way that Cannes a few years ago was kind of purpose for purpose sake. This is a real tangible benefit. And there's some other examples like that. So no, absolutely, you can see the effectiveness coming through.
Yeah. And Chris, do you see that perhaps, to look at it from a different perspective, the work you're doing at Weber Shandwick, how is that playing out in terms of how you kind of go from the huge amounts of data you're able to harvest now to the kind of actual work? Yeah,
so maybe not so much an example at Cannes this year, but we've showed you in the past some of the work that we've been doing for a long time with Excedrin, right? Yeah. Moving from a PR model into more of a branded content model into something that really is more about using technology to really bring empathy to, again, the marketing campaigns that our teams work on with the clients there. I think when you talk about closing the loop, with data, what started as awareness building and in a bit of DTC through couponing has evolved full spectrum. I don't know if you recall seeing the We Feel Your Pain campaign, where we used social listening to understand headache triggers. We then worked with the client to figure out some custom packaging, whether it's commuting or language that the team called adulting. But a few different triggers then were tested through both qualitative and quantitative surveys, and then that became custom Excedrin on the shelves. Those sold out. Right. So the idea of understanding, the sentiment of the users, having some fun with it, having it pull all the way through the communications into the packaging and the product, that's where we see opportunities.
Does this change the kind of traditional creative approach? Whether that's at a PR agency or an ad agency, the traditional model creatively has been, to maybe rely more on instinct and kind of come up with a big idea. Do you see that changing at all? Do you feel that's a challenge maybe in terms of the kinds of people who work on the creative side of the business?
It changes it, but for the better. It's not an either or. It's what you still need, the creative thinking and the creative idea. But if you do your data insight and data mining well up front, you're getting a much tighter brief, a much potentially more unique brief to that brand or business problem or opportunity that gives you a much better launching pad for the creative work. You still need the creative magic and the creative idea, but what the data can do is several things. It can help inform the core idea. It can inform how the idea comes alive at different stages on the customer journey, and the data can prove to a certain extent whether it works or not. And we're now able, in PR terms, to see how our work can actively enhance or damage reputation. And so it is different but better. So it's not an either or for me, is what I see.
Okay. And Chris, do you, anything to add on that? I have another question to ask you, but I want to give you the chance to answer that one too.
Yeah, well, what I think is really interesting and something that we're super mindful of is we're both getting smart about the market and also providing as much education internally with our employees is historically you think about data to support the insights, right? To make the strategic plans better, that then, once it gets to the creatives, then they come up with some pretty interesting interpretations of that. If you think about the flywheel of where data is going in terms of a communications mix, it makes the strategy potentially better. It changes the dynamics of content and how content is created. It changes how we think about media distribution, media engagement, what a stakeholder environment looks like. So, it's really getting into a lot of parts of our business, and then maybe Hugh's going to talk about it in a second, but then it gets into, the idea of us creating experiences for clients using machine learning, right? So we're not looking at data and analytics only through the lens of, are we extracting the data to make, again, our team smarter about the world? We've got to make the work that we're producing smarter, because a lot of that is being infused with data and tech and some different things that are pretty interesting. One of them, the HSBC campaign that's here, that takes this idea of deep fakes and a lot of the dark stuff, and was actually flipped in a way that's really positive and is up for some awards here. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Two shortlists, so fingers are firmly crossed. Digital fraud is a big issue for everybody. It's an issue for the individual customer, but it's an issue for the bank and the amount of money they have to refund. And we took a lady called Rachel Riley, who's one of the biggest TV celebs in the UK, who's known for her mathematical prowess on primetime TV. And we launched some stuff on a Friday night with her saying she was actually bad at maths and this was all a fake. And the big reveal, because that was Cyber Friday, and Black Friday, it came through on Cyber Monday, that we had doctored her images as she was talking, and that just to alert people to be mindful about digital fraud for HSBC. We're behind that. It had extraordinary amount of viewing and engagement, and we've seen some shifts in some of the brand metrics around that as well. And that's the kind of thing that data would not have allowed us to do a little while ago, but now in terms of the targeting of that campaign that we went for, the messaging of it, it was really powerful for us.
So again, just bringing it back though to just PR business more broadly, and Gail spoke about it this morning in a panel where Paul and others were at. We need to not only incorporate data into our output, but we also have to understand the implications of data and analytics and artificial intelligence and machine learning as it relates to different consequences of using the data, privacy, misuse at a foundational level. And then, as the rep from IBM was talking about, there are huge ethical implications that go with this as well. And our clients have historically relied on us to help them navigate, some of these, emerging issues. So we're really playing both sides, both the implications of data and technology and artificial intelligence, but also we're building that into some of the campaigns you'll see coming from us at Cannes and some of the things you've covered in the past.
And it's interesting, you mentioned, some of the ethical implications. There's also a geographic aspect to it, right? You have a much tighter privacy environment in the EU, let's say, much more lax in a market like China, for example. I mean, how do you kind of balance this when you're working for global brands?
It's similar to when we frankly started, going beyond the core PR into social and having guidelines and having standards for what we advise and what we don't advise our clients doing. Is we again start to use first-party data as well as other data that's coming from other sources. We have an obligation to be pretty clean with it and more aggregate. Again, points of view versus, everything about Arun, and then we're going to start to really do some of that, deep behavioral, manipulative stuff that just isn't good for legalities. It's also not necessarily good for trust either, and we've got to be super mindful of that given our role in the world and in the agency scene.
So you absolutely have to be true to the business and act with integrity, but also at the same time understand what the potential and the opportunity might be. So I was at a panel this morning about health in China, and you mentioned Chinese are more willing to give their data because they know the government's already got a lot of it. But if you have because in China, as I learned this morning for the first time, there are no GPs, there are no doctors, so everybody self-diagnoses. And if they don't feel that bad, then they just carry on with it. And so people become chronic more quickly before people find out. And so the opportunity for health companies to come in with a value proposition, which we will help you cure yourself or we'll help you self-diagnose, are the two options. If we understand some of your data, people are willing to give that data for their health. Now that's, as long as you manage that data in a way that is with integrity, that's of benefit to the population. And if you think the number of people in China who are in that kind of situation, that's a pretty helpful thing.
With integrity.
Yeah,
right?
With integrity, absolutely with integrity. Yeah.
I mean, you talked about the work becoming smarter. So we just stay on this topic just for one more question. Can you make the work smarter while you're doing the work? So do campaigns get better?
Well, there's the opportunity, and again, this has been the foundation of, again, like going back to the media code days and brand publishing and some of the stuff we're bringing to clients now, going on 5 and 6 years ago. If you weren't tightening up the application of that branded content, then you were wasting your clients' money, because you could see, and you see it every day, I'm sure, with what you produce. The metrics are there to understand what people are engaging with and what they aren't, and how deep they're going, and what video they're clicking on. So that's table stakes stuff, whether, again, you're publishing through a site or you're, again, optimizing Facebook ads or programmatic. So the work has to continually get smarter, because clients need to see more and more return of what they're putting in. So there's clearly an accountability element that's definitely part of this We Solve kind of mission that we put out to our people. What I think is very underlooked in that process is you can create some shortcuts now to, again, take what historically, groups of people have been doing and use technology to cut video more efficiently. In the case of, the chatbot capability that we brought to some clients, we're making community management more efficient. So there's an effectiveness side of this, there's an efficiency side of this. And then just maybe one more reference in terms of just like, again, AI and content coming together. I went to a panel, actually it was a keynote yesterday for Soul Machines. That's essentially, creation of digital twins. And it's not only, again, like a CGI representation that you see in video games, they are building, artificial cognition into that person. So they are replicating what would be a customer service experience as their entry into the potential of having automated doctors, or what we're seeing in China, automated anchors, presenting the news. Like, that is a much different way of applying data and analytics and intelligence than, a brief that we're giving to a creative. So this is really going to stretch us, and we're trying to stay on top of it.
And it is already. So we work with one health client where we've developed that one of their big issues is how to keep the patient communications going and keep the patient engaged in the communication around the disease, particularly as it's developing. And the old sort of newsletters or emails or even Facebook kind of platforms are not as strong as what we've developed with one client is a chatbot that in the morning you can tell it how you're feeling, and it can tell you how to take advantage, or what steps to take to make yourself feel better, ease the pain, whatever. But as it's telling you what the latest information or research or whatever it is, and advising you how to manage your illness, when you're telling it how you're feeling, it's able to aggregate data from lots of people, anonymised, about how people's conditions are getting better or worse relative to weather conditions or whatever else is going on in the world. So, or geo-specific type stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that we're in, because that's still about managing the reputation for the client's brand and business. But that's the kind of issues and challenges that we're now solving. Whereas before we might have been solving around community management on a Facebook platform, we're now doing it in a very different way, and it's data that allows us to do that, and the interest in AI and ML that's coming from it, and that's a fascinating place to be intellectually. Really interesting place to be.
Yeah, and that is a long way away from what you'd call, the traditional bread and butter work in this industry. So We Solve, as you get deeper into machine learning, using AI to understand data, can you automate solving?
I don't think you can ever, fully automate a solve. I think what you can do is clearly automate some of the intelligence gathering, some of the presentation of at least starter insights. You can automate what would historically be more of a strategic process. You can build that into the software to almost like force the proper steps to do the necessary intelligence gathering and starter insight development. But as we've been doing more and more of the strategic work for clients, it's always a combination of someone who understands the client's business first and foremost, what the problem is we're trying to solve, a strategist who really understands how we could create something from the insights, and typically a business analyst that's working hand in hand with the other two and potentially a fourth with the creative to kind of go back and forth with our data science teams and the tech to continually kind of tweak again what's coming out to get sharper and sharper on something that would be valuable for a client. So this isn't about creating dashboards. It's not about creating generic environments where you have a general sense of what's going on. When we're solving problems, they're very specific to the client and they're very specific to that client need. And again, it takes a combination of the machine and the people behind it to deliver some of the stuff that's winning business right now.
Presumably reporting as well is going to be more automated.
So it goes throughout. So clearly there's if we're just going through this particular case I just referenced more from a strategic process to get to a better campaign, it's throughout. It's what's going to land on something that's compelling and interesting from a campaign. How do we test it? How do we put it into market and learn from how the market reacts to it? And then clearly more than ever, our clients are asking, hey, like, what's up? How did it do? Based on their measures, and the measures, I think, as you know, talking to all the people in the industry, it's all over the place in terms of how our clients are, validating the impact of work these days.
So it's not just reporting, it's about monitoring the whole way through. So from the start, from your benchmark. So because we're in the reputation business, we can monitor social linguistic conversations just all the time in social and in online media. It's a little bit harder in print, but you can get there with specialist titles if you go to the right people. But we can be monitoring what's been said about a brand or business constantly. And so we're able to report not just at the end of the month or the end of the campaign. It's in real time, and we're starting to productize some services around this. We're going from just we'll do a bit of monitoring into it to a much more formalised way, and the data is packaged in a much better way with insight attached to it and coming out from it. It's really, as I said earlier about the work here, we're just scratching the surface on a lot of this stuff. It's a really exciting place to be.
So the new tagline is "We Solve," and
Did you get the WS, by the way? Weber Shandwick, We Solve?
Actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Good. I like it.
That's just transformed it for you.
I remember when it was WSW, Weber Shandwick Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah.
There you go.
So it's clearly a more scientific kind of, let's say, I wouldn't say approach, but it leans more towards science, it seems, that kind of language, which makes a lot of sense given what you two have been talking about today, the ability to drive insights from data and make work smarter. Does it concern you at all that it moves away a little bit from the kind of creative storytelling traditions of the PR industry? Everyone's shaking their heads very vigorously.
And again, I mean, that same question comes up as we talk about some of the changes in the industry, changes in client need, and therefore changes that we have to make to how we approach client work. Imagine in a place with as many employees and as many markets, that question comes up all the time. Pretty clear. Going back when we were talking about solving problems last year to the push last week. It's human-led, data-driven. It's balanced. It's not. We are never going to be again a software house that is essentially running client programs on software day in and day out. We're driven by people. Human instincts, sensibilities around both, the client businesses we represent, as well as, again, the market dynamics, and if anything, the technology allows us to be smarter. That's it.
It's really interesting. Forrester launched some research this morning and had a whole panel around this, that clients have over-invested in tech and underinvested in creativity. And because they've overinvested in tech, everyone's got the same website entry point to their brand or business, and everyone's got the same app. And so the way to differentiate is through creativity. And that's the balance that we aim to strike all the time. You can't be all one and not the other.
When it comes to actually accessing the data, collecting it, I mean, how does that work now? Because we've seen so many different approaches. Is it something that you do at a holding group level? You've acquired, a business like Bomoda, for example. I mean, what is the solution here in terms of actually getting to the data?
Yeah, so it's going to vary by client and by situation. We have, clearly some amazing resources within IPG. Clearly the Axiom deal was huge for us, and so we're spending quite a bit of time, with them, understanding how not only the data capability but the consultative capability and the trust that they have with clients. Like how does that work for the kind of work that we do? We've clearly made investments within Weber Shandwick, with Bomoda, and then different partnerships that we've built into that model that brings some pretty interesting capability to the table that we haven't seen a third-party supplier being able to deliver to the PR industry. So if you think about Salesforce and Adobe and what big marketing runs on, there still isn't something that big PR runs on. Right. So that's a huge opportunity and something that we're exploring. And then there's point solutions, right? Yeah. Whether it's something that we bring to make a certain part of our program, programming better, either that we procure, or to Hugh's point, I mean, our clients have invested a ton of money in various data partnerships. In some cases, we know very well how to use it. In other cases, we have to help our teams, and in some cases, help our clients' teams really extract the value from what they've invested in. So every single scenario is a bit different depending on how broad and deep we need to go to, again, deliver the work.
Does the industry, do you think it needs a sales force for PR?
I think the industry is going to need accountability for sure, because accountability is built into every other part of a global organization, whether it's ERP or dealer systems or payrolls. Like, how can communications not have, again, something that is enterprise grade to, again, understand the impacts of that reputation work? And
the view has always been to try and do that, you have to kind of push together various different bits of software. I mean, do you feel like is a better idea to try and build something bespoke?
So we're exploring that right now. There's two dynamics. One is the stack, what is the technology that brings that intelligence to the table? What are the data, the data sources that are, fit for purpose for a communications agency versus maybe something that's more direct response driven? And then how do we spin up different capabilities off of that, depending on if it's a risk and reputation foray, if it's influencer driven. I mean, there's all kinds of things, as our clients come to us for. So we feel we've got to build something that's right for Weber Shandwick versus, again, try to piece together, all kinds of different technologies and different capabilities on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that would be very interesting, I think.
See you next week.
Yeah.
That's
more to come.
That's soon. So just to finish up, because we're almost at 30 minutes, there's always been this, I feel, and maybe this is a little unfair, but there's always been this kind of feeling I see amongst PR agencies and maybe PR creatives, that it's kind of functioned on this idea of people know a good idea when they see one. And I'm curious to know what your kind of responses to someone who maybe has that kind of viewpoint, given the ability we now have in terms of quantitative ability.
That's a big question for the last 30 seconds. Ultimately, a creative idea has to move you, and so emotion is still a huge part of it. So you can't judge it only by maths. I think you can judge the impact to a large extent by maths, and you can make it better through the data. But yeah, instinct is still part of this. It's to the thing earlier about we can never fully automate, we solve. There's a human instinct to this and emotion, because ideas move you, I think.
Chris?
Well, I think if we want to summarize what's happening here at Cannes and what we're seeing inside of our business based on client need, you have this, I guess, two converging forces of essentially PR and DR. The PR side of the house, obviously, again, creativity, the right relationship with the public, the right ideas that get people talking. If you look at Cannes winners over the last, Hugh, five or so years or even longer, a lot of these are PR at the core. They are ideas that move culture, get people talking, and again, raise a lot of awareness in the market. It's not enough though just to build a lot of buzz. You then have to have that direct response component that is being built in through marketing systems, data and analytics, and frankly, again, going back to the IAB, direct brand, lessons that are everywhere these days. You have to have a different model. So we see those two worlds coming together, and we feel, beyond Cannes, that it's a huge opportunity for us, and why we think We Solve is the right place for us to be.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. This is really interesting. I got to say, it's actually kind of exciting to hear about some of the work you're doing. So enjoy Cannes, survive and thrive.
Survive and thrive.
And I will hopefully get you back on the podcast sometime soon.
Yeah, look forward to that. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Shane.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. Sponsored by Weber Shandwick. Our team of analysts, strategists, creatives and technologists bring clarity to the complex in a prove it works world with global scale and local insight. Weber Shandwick. We solve.